please keep posting your burning question in the chat. We can all watch it. Super fantastic. Kurt, take us away. If I can find
it. Okay. Thank you very much. I had been doing training courses today online, so I did not have the opportunity to hear the word from the horse's mouth. So I actually are not really sure what the message was from the fathers, but I like to give you my 5 cents anyway. So so I'll share a screen with you, and the particular sort of take we took on this when we talked about it is Scrum really old hat now? Has it just been around for so long that we now need to look for something else? Of course, there are plenty of people around us that would say that, and especially with things like this, platforms, new concepts. We have to realize that we're in a sort of a dangerous territory here, because everybody wants to come up with something new and see if they could claim a stake in the ground and make a lot of money on it. There's a lot of money in getting a buzzword rolling. Some years ago, some of you may be familiar with Steve Denning, who wrote a long praise for Scrum and said that Ken Schwaber and Jeff Sutherland actually should have had the Nobel Prize in Management, if there was such a thing, for introducing Scrum. And then he used the term radical management.
Go get it.
And radical management, so what does that mean? And one of my friends met him at a conference and says, well, Steve, how come you call this radical management? And he looked at him very bewildered and said, well, of course, I've got to have the term to market. There has to be a unique identifier, something that is my term. And so therefore there's a lot of competition in this area here. However, Scrum is not old hat. Let's start with that. And I would also like to try and just give a very brief, which I didn't invent, but someone, Paddy Corey, has been kind enough to actually write up and make a nice graphic of it. But in the beginning was the old book, Agile Software Development with Scrum. Most people recognize that this was the defining moment in a way. 2001, 2002, this book came out. This sort of coincided with that there was some crisis in the industry, in the IT industry. In the banking world, for example, they just discovered there was something called the internet, and they needed to do something about it, and their own batch-oriented systems were not really that great. Ken Schwaber and Jeff Sutherland had worked with Scrum and the embryos of Scrum through the 90s. And they presented on a conference, which is often quoted that in 95, they presented on an OOPSLA conference, and absolutely nothing happened. But this book made something happen. I found this book 2005. I was on a consulting gig in Denver, Colorado, and there was this book in a bookshop. Well, here in Denmark, we didn't have very good bookshops for software people, but there was one in Denver, Colorado, and I visited that one. There was the book, and I got extremely excited about the concepts. Well, I'm from the western part of Denmark, and we are not supposed to get excited over here. We are supposed to be sort of dour people speaking at a monotone voice and not being excited about anything. But on this occasion, I did get excited because this was a totally new way of dealing with managing projects and managing development, which I had tried to do. This became, for the first 10 years of Scrum's story, Scrum's history, this became became the reference book in many ways. Now, other people wrote books, and we could quote a whole string of them, but this was more or less the book. And when I became a trainer in 2008, all we had was this book, perhaps, and some scribbles from 𝗦𝗰𝗿𝘂𝗺. This was the training outline for the training material. And we picked up from various, I'm perhaps sort of a second generation Scrum trainer. Some of the first batch of them included, for example, 𝗬𝗿𝘂𝗺 from Germany, which I regard as my mentor. And I learned a lot of things, probably also wrong things from him, but there you have it. Then in 2010 came the first Scrum guide. And these were strange times because there had been this fight between 𝗦𝗰𝗿𝘂𝗺 and the Scrum Alliance. He had left, founded scrum.org, and there was now a Scrum guide published under the umbrella of the Scrum Alliance. So that was the very first one. And then these are the revisions, and now we have 2020, the last one here, the 2020 Scrum Guide, and more or less it was finished in July this year. So what happened during this period here? What's the deal? It's quite different in the old book. For example, just one thing: sprints were definitely 1 month. End of story. That goes through the whole book. There was also things absent. There was no retrospective, which of course today we regard as almost the most important thing of Scrum. So quite a few things have changed. You could analyze this as almost, and some people do that, and I'm not going to do it, but you could analyze it almost as the Gospels. You take the Bible and say, okay, what's the difference between Mark and Luke and John, the Gospel according to whoever, and see if you can find minor details and what has changed and what has not. I'm going to do a more of a sweeping overview of it. And first of all, I looked at it. I went through all those versions here as a preparation here. And initially I thought I would be detailed, but then I thought that'll take 3 or 4 hours, and then people will be extremely bored and probably not useful for anybody. But the first thing to note about the 2010 version is that the retrospective was added. So that was very, very clear. That this was now a very important feedback loop, and it became more clear that the inspect and adapt part was formalized through the retrospective. The first version of this was a bit of a mess. It was also the book. It was also the version where you still talked a lot. Some of you older guys will remember the pigs and the chicken. This was the big thing of Scrum the first 10 years that you talked about pigs and chickens, and we don't do that much anymore. We sort of moved into a corporate world where pigs and chicken don't really belong. Although you can learn a lot from pigs. According to Winston Churchill, he likes pigs because he said dogs have a tendency to look up to us, cats look down on us, but not pigs. They treat us as equals. So the pigs in the old story from 𝗦𝗰𝗿𝘂𝗺 were, of course, the team and the Scrum Master and the product owner, because they are the people who have their bacon on the line. And the chicken are just chicken. They are stakeholders, outsiders who have opinions, but they have no bacon on the line. This was still a term used in the 2010. And as we try to move up to become not just like maverick kind of wild guys in the IT department, and we all wanted to get into more of the management territory, we cleaned up our act, and then in July 2011, there was a new one where the content of the daily Scrum changed. Actually, not really to the better, I believe. From 2011, it became more or less, this is an event for just the development team. And before that, I mean, at least I have always seen, and I still do that actually, say that the daily Scrum is, yes, it's a synchronization event for the team to plan for the next 24 hours and make sure that if there is anybody stuck with something, that they either can get help from the team or the Scrum Master. But it is also a part of the transparency. Which actually is a concern of mine. From July 2011 and onwards, it doesn't mention that the daily Scrum is an open meeting where everybody can come and see what's going on. I still think that's important. Another thing we had at the time was the great discussion, and you know how the religious wars can break out in software communities. And we had this great discussion about whether it was a commitment or a forecast. And that started there, and it's still sort of, in a way, raging. So what happens at a sprint planning? Is it a sprint commitment or is it a sprint forecast? People can talk a long time about that, but and I sort of complained a little bit that we went for forecast, because I said, this, for me, maybe it's because I live in Denmark, but it sounds like weather forecast. And the weather forecast here in Denmark, that is sort of, well, maybe it happens, maybe it doesn't. And the one thing for sure is I can't do anything about it. So it's a bit weak, isn't it? I kind of like the term commitment defined the way I learned from 𝗦𝗰𝗿𝘂𝗺. He said, commitment means the team says, we believe we can do this. This is what we believe we can do, and we will do our best to do it. We believe with our current knowledge that we can do it, and we will do our best to do it. Because now, after that time, it's not longer free to change it. Now other people are starting to rely somewhat on it. So anyway, this was what happened here. There was a quick revision just to clean up major things. And then in 2013, the major thing here was really that people now discovered, oh, not a good idea to start talking about backlog grooming. Grooming means something different. People discovered means older men chasing younger women on the internet. So maybe that's not a good idea to talk about that in that meeting. So we now call it backlog refinement. The activity, however, was very important, that it was now introduced under a different name in 11, and here in 2013, it became evident that we need to do that. As we work on the backlog, in order to have a good sprint planning, typically you cannot just cram everything into the sprint planning. You have to have some activity before that, and that was called backlog refinement. It was a bit unclear. Well, actually, it did say that the team and the product owner just have to decide when they do it and how much they do it, depending on circumstances. So that, of course, got a lot of people to talk about, well, is it a meeting or is it not a meeting? Should we have one or several meetings? And depending on how much you want to enforce prescription, you could either go with one or the other. I think in many cases, when you start up, it can be a good idea to decide that you want to have a meeting like this, just to make sure that it does happen, that you don't forget to refine the backlog. So that was more or less the most important thing. These were actually very small changes. Refinement in 16 got watered down a bit, and it sort of like, yeah, well, they talk about whether they want it or not. No. The most important thing in 16 was, in retrospect, it's strange that it didn't occur before, because then the Scrum values were included in the Scrum guide. That is terribly important, I think, because they were very, very clear in the old black book on the left side of the screen. And why they never made it into the Scrum guide is also a weird thing to me, because they're really key. They're really the foundation in many ways. During this period, and I went back through some of my old notes, and I saw all the discussions we had going on and on and on in 2011 and 12, because now all of a sudden we needed to have a test in the Scrum community. There had been people out there who had introduced tests, and all of a sudden, especially in the Scrum Alliance, where we didn't have a test as a certification, we got hammered by all sorts of people who said, well, clearly it cannot be a serious certification if there's no test. Thou must have a test. So a test was developed. It was really bad. And it was really unclear what it was based on. Then it came to a conclusion that it should be based on the Scrum guide. Okay, so there it was. It was based on the Scrum guide. But of course, the Scrum guide is very silent about a lot of details, because, for example, there's not much. The Scrum guide doesn't say much about product owner. So to this day, for example, the Scrum Alliance has not been able to make a test relating to the product owner, because Scrum guide doesn't talk about it. If we move on to 17, one thing that I think was important from my perspective was that we now have language in there that talk about how the Scrum Master is a servant leader. Something that I always thought he was, and I can't remember who told me he was, but this was always my big thing. So I like that. So now we have the 2020 version, and they start out by saying this is less prescriptive. This is what it is. We're trying to make it less prescriptive and more freedom to the people all. And so that's going to be a topic of this conversation this evening. Some of the things that I've noted in it, that I went through it several times and underlined, and oh, well, that's new, isn't it? And I sort of double back, and it's now very clear that we talk about complex problems. I like that, because, well, it was sort of in the earlier ones, but it's very clear now. This is what Scrum is for. They've also said that Scrum has now been liberated from the strong ties to software development. Obviously, it started in the software world. And ever since 2011, for example, the Scrum Alliance have said, yes, we're here to improve the situation of work, improve work generally. But in reality, there are still a lot of ties to software. So it's a complex problem. For the first time, as far as I can see, unless I missed something, there's a real clear connection to lean. Something that I think I was taught by 𝗦𝗰𝗿𝘂𝗺, that obviously Scrum is an implementation of the fundamental lean principles, for example, exemplified in the Deming circle, plan, do, study, act. That you plan the best you can, you do the best you can, then you stop up and you study what you've done and you act upon what you've learned. Schwaber and Sutherland, who formulated Scrum, always talked much more about empirical process control. So they sort of took a process control angle, which I think is a narrow one. It's true, it's good, it's all right. But I think in the bigger picture, Scrum is really a sort of an implementation of lean for complex work. So I like that a lot. It now talks about that predictability actually is a benefit you can achieve from working with Scrum. I like that as well. It's also something we've always claimed, that, okay, we've had discussions with people who say, well, we don't really estimate because you can't do it anyway. So no estimate is the way forward. And we've always said that not really, because in real life you're bound to be forced to come up with some sort of statement about what you can do for this kind of money. And so if we can be more predictable, even though it's complex, if we can develop some ability to be predictable based on experience, that can only be a good thing. So predictability is in there now. So is controlling risk, which also is an important thing. Many of you here are probably also project managers with other kind of certifications. And of course, in projects, controlling risks are always very, very important. And it's in there. Very good. Building trust is in there. Very good as well. Also something that it's really important if you want to have the full benefit of working the Scrum way, the Agile way, the Lean way. It has to include trust, because you simply have to sort of delegate responsibility further and further out in the organization. We move authority as far out as we can until we can find someone who can carry it, says General Stanley McChrystal. But you can only do that if you trust people. You don't give them authority if you don't trust them, right? So trust is a good thing, and it's good it's in there. And then it talks about sizing, which is kind of an odd word, but that's because I guess they're too afraid to use estimation, but the word estimation. But sizing is there, the idea that the team will come up with statements and ideas about how big the job is. So all of these things are really good. The first one is a bit it's a bit something we can discuss, and we'll do it in a little while here. First of all, this is just, I'm not going to talk through all of this. You get the slides afterwards, and then you have this as reading material. These are the official comments from the Scrum Alliance. So we'll just put it up there, and I'll just talk about the headlines. And so it says, yeah, it's even less prescriptive. That is clear. That's what it is. Then it says, we now have introduced one team focused on one product. Well, it was always like that, but it's like the roles have been blurred a bit, and they now talk about one team, same objective, 3 sets of accountabilities: product owner, Scrum Master, and developers. They now talk about a product goal. Before that was used to be called a vision, and I'm not so sure that this actually is clearer. But so now there is a product goal. Sprint goal, definition of done, and product goal the words have been changed. I can't make up my mind whether I think it's an improvement or not. I was perfectly happy with the way it was before. And then we talk about self-managing over self-organizing. As a non-English speaker, it actually doesn't mean that much to me. It's one or the other will suffice. But clearly there is a detail here. It's just that I happen to not use the word managing so much anymore as I talk about leadership. Then there are 3 sprint planning topics now. In the old days, we have 2 sprint planning meetings, sprint planning 1, sprint planning 2. Then at some point, 2011, it became 1 meeting, 2 topics. All right, not a big deal, whatever. And now we've introduced a 3rd topic, which was always there as well. The why part is really the sprint goal, but it's now sort of been elevated to a 3rd topic. I don't think that changes much. The language have been simplified. That is true. There is no mentioning of software-specific things, apart from the thing we've always had, that the team that does the work is called the development team. And that's kind of a problem if you work outside the Scrum, as outside software, as I do a lot. So people don't think of the development team as the people that they are. That it is still an IT specific thing. But anyway, that'll work. And it's been shortened. So it's clearly there's less in there now. So you can read about this, and there are no doubt people will write many articles about the new Scrum version. So even less prescriptive, I'm not so sure that's a good thing. We'll discuss that in a moment again. The others here, well, I don't really think that matters a lot. I don't think I've looked at it. It won't change the way I train. It won't change the way I talk about things. It helps me that the language has become simpler. And then there are some good things. That was really what I mentioned, some of it before. I really like that it now is a clear link to lean thinking, and that we have the foundation in lean. We have so what is lean thinking? Many ways of saying it, but the simplest one I know of is it's always focused on customer value adding activities. Number 2, always look to remove waste. Number 3, respect for people, allow them pride of workmanship. Those 3 elements are very key. The clear link to complexity. Scrum is for complex problems. A purpose is predictability and controlling risk. I like that. Building trust, definitely like that. And that's a foundation for doing Scrum. And then we have the sizing. There's a little bit of talk about multiple teams. So in the Scrum, in the 2020 Scrum guide, it's more or less implied that what the people behind less have been talking about for years is, well, Scrum, if you scale up, you basically have multiple Scrum teams, they share backlog and they share product owner. If you need more people, then you can fit into a small team. But it's only one sentence, but it more or less says this is the way you do it. More or less the way it always was. There's only this word about the software at the development team that bugs me a little bit. But anyway, and so another thing, I'm not so sure that's a good idea, but clearly it is less prescriptive here. Yeah, maybe you have a Scrum Master, or maybe he's also a team member, or maybe a product owner is also a team member, and that's right. I mean, we happen to do that as well in our little company, because we're not more people. We have a software development group, but the Scrum Master is also a developer, because we don't have more people. But in order to clarify this, to make it clear, I think it's a step backwards. I think it's the vanilla Scrum ought to be just clear and precise. And then you say sometimes you can't do it that way and you have to compromise. And the same thing a little bit about the sprint goal. I'm not really sure what they mean by the words that's in there now. It's a bit fuzzy for me, but it seems to me that, okay, we'll set a sprint goal. If it doesn't work, we'll set another one. And yeah, isn't that a bit weak? So yeah, it's clearly less prescriptive, because it almost seems as if it doesn't matter. So let's move on from that. Less prescriptive. We're heading up to having a quick discussion about this. In the complex territory, we need enabling constraints. Too loose constraints will just make it too difficult to get started for an inexperienced team. The very robust, the very mature team, maybe they don't need many constraints because they have developed an intuitive skill that they just do it. The way we talk about it, I'm just taking a slide here that we use, and we used it today in our training as well. Say, okay, we have the complex problem, we have this big fluffy problem we have to solve. What is it Scrum does? Scrum gives us some enabling constraints, Dave Snowden's term, enabling constraints in the complex domain. It starts with, we have sprints, iterations, we have an extreme focus on quality. Then we have just 3 very well-defined and clearly, sharply focused roles. We have some events, meetings that make sure that we remember to do the right things. And then we have some artifacts, visualizations that make everything visible. These are the relative few and very clear enabling constraints. And inside here, we have the Scrum playing field. I really like those constraints that are in the old Scrum guide. And I'm not so happy if they are being weakened and like, oh yeah, maybe do you this, you do that. I think it's a good thing. It's a good thing to have a clear starting point. If we soften the contours too much, it's almost like Jennifer Grey here. Some of you remember this actor from the Dirty Dancing movies in the 80s, and she wasn't really happy about her nose. She wasn't happy about that it was distinct, that it was iconic, and so she had a nose job done, and then nobody recognized her. And as she says herself, she went from iconic celebrity to anonymity in hours. So we don't really want Scrum to be just whatever you think you like. And she lost her career. Nobody in Hollywood actually booked her for a movie after that, really. One of the things that I always used with Scrum is that I sort of bang on away to people and say, there is empirical evidence that if you do it the Scrum way, it will work for you. It will work for you. But if we say, well, it can sort of be whatever it is, and then you don't have a strong argument anymore. I like the idea that Scrum is something that will work. Maybe you can do better, but it will work for you. Some of you also know, and perhaps use the 𝗦𝗰𝗿𝗂𝗺 argument, that when you start with something here, you learn new ways. You follow the principles of Aikido with 𝗦𝗰𝗿𝗺, the shoe phase. You learn traditional wisdom, and then once you are sort of you know that and you can do it, and then you can detach from the tradition, and you can break with it. You can say, oh, well, I have some special qualities. I can even do better than just following tradition. And then in the rephase, it becomes your intuitive approach, transcendence. I really like this idea of thinking of Scrum is where you start, then you get better and better, and then eventually you can start doing it even better than vanilla Scrum. So I usually talk to people about, okay, if you want to get started with this Agile stuff, do it with Scrum, do it with vanilla Scrum, get as close as you can to vanilla Scrum, because it will work for you. So many people have tried it. It will work. It may work even better once you get experience and you can start changing a few things and you realize we could do even better here. So yeah, I like the 𝗦𝗰𝗿𝗺𝗺. I don't like to lose too much of the prescriptiveness. And so heading into a breakout room now, Torsten, I just want to say, here's one way of looking at it. You could either fall into the obvious corner where you try to have full prescription, best practice for everything, and that can lead to sort of a fascist rule-based Scrum implementation. You can fall into the other chaos corner where you have no prescription, no rules, and you just do something, or this is what I think Scrum should be, and you get bastardized and rogue Scrum implementations. And you really want to be in the middle. You want to balance between the complex and the complicated. Minimal prescription, enabling constraints, Kaizen, constant improvement implementations, a balancing act. It's a little bit like this. Here, we have to try and keep the ball up at the top of this curve, and you have to, it's instability here. You have constantly to watch it and navigate it to be there. Otherwise, you risk falling into one of the corners. So with this, we have a breakout session now where we will give you an opportunity to discuss in some groups based on this drawing here. Actually, what is your opinion about this? Where do you think we should be with respect to prescription and not prescription? Because that is the main topic of the Scrum Guide 2020. So how much prescription should we have? How little should we have? I'm sure there's room for many hours of debate.
I can see that not all room was occupied, so I would just suggest that one of the rooms that was actually where there were people meeting, let's hear from you.
Yeah, hi, Torsten, it's Steph here. Hope you can see me as I'm speaking now. Hi, I was in room 21 with, I think it was Magnus and Aaron, one from Denmark and one from the US. I'm from London, so it's a nice diverse group. I think where we landed in our short discussion, and we could have talked for longer, was that we probably are more in the middle to left-hand side of the diagram. So we felt that we like the fact that it's become less prescriptive, because actually it's the principles that hold true. And you know, we all shared a bit about our backgrounds and context of trying to land Scrum in our different business contexts. And Aaron gave also a very interesting background of kind of the lineage of things like what, you know, from Lean to Agile and Scrum. And I think we just all felt that actually the less prescription was better. And I think, what else did we, Aaron and Magnus, please jump in if I'm not reflecting something accurately. But I think we did say, though, that it is useful to still have clear principles, because the experience, particularly if you're starting up a new team working in ways of Scrum, it's really hard. If you don't have a stake in the ground, then they can just easily say, well, why are we doing a daily stand-up? Why does it have to be daily? Why can't we do it different ways? And I think there's a danger before, and I think the 𝗦𝗰𝗿𝘂𝗺 model shares that quite nicely, of if you don't really know what you're doing and why, what the purpose is, what's the principle, and you then try and change things, you're not really sure what the end aim or the goal and outcome is of what you're changing. So that was kind of a bit of a summary of our discussion. But like I said, Magnus, Aaron, if I've said something that doesn't reflect it, please jump in.
Very good. Thanks a lot, Steph. Thanks a lot. Anybody else would like to?
Yeah, I was put into one empty room, and then I joined some nice people, and we actually had some very good discussions. One of the takeaways we ended up was maybe sidetracking a little bit, and that was related to the discussion about chaos. And then we ended into this self-organizing and self-management, and had a little discussion about this distinction between self-organizing and self-management, because self-organizing, it doesn't matter if you have a group of, I mean, they might be clever guys in some context, but if they are 5 years old mentally in Agile, and you ask them to self-organize, you end up in chaos. And it might be very hard to get back into good structure. Whereas if we look more into it as a self-managing team, I mean, it twists the understanding quite a bit. And I think that's a very important distinction.
Okay. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Tobias.
If I could elaborate on what Tobias just said.
Yeah.
I saw the presentation before the 2020 presentation that was done, and this was a very important point for them, why they were changing this definition from self-organizing to self-managing, because organizing was being interpreted as I can do whatever I want, whereas managing means, well, you can manage yourself, your own time, how you work, but you have to do it towards the goal of the sprint or the goal of the product development. Okay. So I can appreciate that we as non-English natives will sort of have a different taste of a word or different sense of a word.
Yeah.
And this becomes maybe better when we get our own translations of the various manuals. But it's not just semantics. Many of these things are not just semantics, just like you had the example of grooming. Well, that was a word that you couldn't use because it became connected to something else. I had a team that talked about being enablers for something, which sounds like a good thing, but it's also an expression that's being used as being an enabler for an alcoholic. Where I, as a Danish person, felt, well, enabling people, that should be a good thing, but no, it isn't, because he's going to get drunk and he'll never come to work. So this semantic stuff is really important, and right. I think some of it might be lost in us having to work in English. That was just
Okay, well, thanks a lot. I've read the same statement that that you just said, so I know why it's been changed. It's just that I actually never got that out of self-organizing. I always thought, though, self-organizing obviously is that it's towards the sprint goal. It's not do whatever you damn well please. So so
It's possible the problem will persist no matter what the hell you call
yeah,
it, because
yeah,
it's just an
that's right.
interpretive
Thanks,
developers.
Jacob. Thanks.
May
Thanks a
I-
lot for the input.
Really?
Good. May I add a comment
Really?
here?
Sure.
Jakob, to what you're saying about the language here, we had not so long ago, we had Michael Hammond talking about agile leadership. And one of the things he was talking about was how language define us. It's not us who define language.
Pelle, kan du bare komme
So
ud? Altså,
depending on what we are, so what we are saying actually defines how we
vil du
act,
så
if that makes sense. So that's probably why it's important what words we use and how we interpret those words. Does that
Sure.
make sense?
It absolutely makes sense, but the problem then becomes when you're not acting in your own language.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, so you have the wrong interpretation.
Yeah,
yes.
and of course we always knew that. I mean, Scrum across boundaries is difficult. Cultural boundaries, language barriers, it makes it, of course, even more, because it hinges so much on communication. But I think, in fairness, we've promised people that we'll be done in half an hour. We have another breakout session as well, so it won't take us very long to get there. But I thought we should move on from here. So all right, yeah, it is a balancing act. Where do you think that your equilibrium is? And I think it's also, to some extent, of course, depending on the domain you're in and maybe the history of the organization you work with. I will share screen again. Let's see if we can get that going here. You see that, right? Beyond the Scrum Guide. So, okay, so here's this new document. It's shorter, it's less prescriptive. It has a lot of good intentions and words, and that is what we're after. But what I think immediately by seeing it is that I'm slightly puzzled by the development, really, because there's definitely less to disagree with, and as you saw before, there's a lot that I like has come in there. But there's also less that you can actually get real help from. Like, so what is the vanilla Scrum now that you start with in the 𝗬𝗺? I think that it puzzles me why they've changed it in this direction. Now, of course, I haven't heard the father's own presentation on it, so I'm a bit of a loss here, and I won't try to second guess them on why they did it. But I do think that there is a certain way of trying to keep a brand that, in many ways, is in a bit of a problem right now for many reasons, because there are so many institutions doing Scrum, and there's SAFe, who has their own Scrum, and there's Sutherland that has left the Scrum Alliance and does his own job, so maybe it's about preserving Scrum as a certain item in the whole mix. I think that where we are today, to get the real benefits and get to know what you should do or what you could do, you have to move further. You for example, to go to the Scrum book, a patterns book about Scrum. We have an upcoming book coming which is called True Leadership as a Service, that takes a bit of the same tact, but again, slightly different angle. I think you have to look for different things now. We did that a couple of years ago, as a bunch of Scandinavian Scrum trainers and coaches. Now we've been augmented with people from Germany, Czech Republic, USA, and other places soon. And so we try to say, if we take all these things together, we want to do something for the whole organization, not just the team, that one team, then let's try and pull all those concepts together. And we call this Agile Lean Leadership. We had beta version of a book out a while ago. It's now out of print, but and so what we've said, Scrum is at the heart of all what we're doing. This is really the core thing, and I strongly believe that. So Scrum is never, not at all, old hat, but instead we've sometimes used the saying that the basic Scrum is fundamental to all of this. The constant work in iteration, the cadence, the application of the plan, do, study, act, the constant focus on delivering constant value through the work and prioritization of the backlog. The dual leadership, which I'm particularly fond of, the balance between the product owner and the Scrum Master. But we need something more to address the issues we meet in many organizations. If you move beyond the single team, then first of all, the Scrum Guide has always been very silent on the product owner. What does he actually do? And what tools does he have at his disposal? How do we get the team to engage? Psychological safety, intrinsic motivation, transparency. How do we stitch together an organization so that the whole flow in the organization can work this way? And so, is it old hat? No, it's not. Not at all. It's not the old hat, but perhaps it's more like the old walking boots. If you want to go on that agile journey towards radical improvement, you've got to have those walking boots that Scrum really is, because this is what will carry you. This is the fundamentals of it. But there are some more things that we typically include in our understanding of this. The complexity. We rest a lot on the complexity defined by Dave Snowden. The whole lean aspect, plan, do, study, act, and W. Edwards Deming. Psychological safety, the learning organization, for example, Amy Edmondson from Harvard. Intrinsic motivation. So what is it that makes a Scrum team tick? The intrinsic motivation, for example, Anders Dusvik from Norway. An understanding of markets and serving people, and how do we actually produce services and products that people will like. For example, Professor 𝗦𝗂𝗺 and his 𝗦𝗂𝗺 analysis of requirements. And then understanding systems, queues, exceptions, protocols, how do you work together? Self-management is a big thing. Some people have really developed this into perfection, and we have this model that we call Agile Lean Leadership that we promote when you want to stitch the organization together. So I think this is time for the second breakout room a session where we try to talk about, in order to solve the real life problems that we experience in our work with organizations, what extra things is it we need to be able to cope with? And there are definitely a lot more than what I've mentioned here. These are just for us the 6 most important areas. So have a discussion about that in your breakout rooms. What is it we need on top of this to be able to really get on the track to radical improvement? So, Thorsten?
Yeah, and we lost Liza for a little while, so I lost the host role, but it looks like we have Liza back. So can you please give me the host role back, Liza?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, no, I don't think I can. I'm on my iPad, so I don't have any. Let me just see what I can do.
Okay, then I think we'll have to skip this
Yeah.
breakout exercise because I'm no longer the host.
Yeah, nothing I can do from the iPad. Sorry about that. My internet connection Actually, I lost my internet connection, so.
All right. Well, I mean, this just shows the new kind of battles we are fighting these days when we're trying to do things online. So let's just instead leave this up here and for a moment, and just say if there's a couple of you that have some statements about what you really think we should include in our toolbox when we try to help organizations move forward. There's bound to be at least a couple that have some ideas here that they would like to tell us about.
One thing I think is something that is relevant nowadays is remote team working. I think we are starting out to be standing next to each other, close collaboration and so on. But the reality today is remote teams. And how do we deal with that in the context of Scrum? Because that's the reality. I don't have the answer. It's more kind of.
I don't have the answer either. What I think we have experienced both in our teams and also in the online training sessions that we've been doing a bunch of, is there are two things. One thing is you actually have to have more discipline. So there is a more structured approach because you can't see the fine details of the other person. So that's one thing. So for good or for bad, a bit more structure, a bit more marshalling of the meeting to make sure there is a rhythm. The other thing is you've got to be very specific and precise. You've got to use, for example, hand gestures more than you would perhaps normally do. We all have to become slightly more Italian, and body language and when we have you have Jakob there. He's signaling to us, and we have the same. Robert is on the call from our friend in Czech Republic. Whenever we have our internal meetings, we can always see where Robert is in there because he's very active and he's yes, he liked that, he doesn't like that, or he wants to say something, and you can see just using the camera, which we're not used to. Like this would be my normal attitude, like this, being far away here, but you have to move up if I want to make a point. We have to be more specific using the mechanisms that are here, and that's something we have to learn, and it's not easy. Thank you, Tobias. Any other comments here?
I would like to, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Well, I'm thinking like, what is the biggest threat to Scrum? And I think maybe there should be a little bit more emphasis about authority and what it means about decision making. And I think I'm new to Scrum, so maybe I say some rubbish, then you just have to correct me. Okay, and that some places you only go half the way, or you don't there's some of the important principles you don't adopt, and then you just have the same hierarchy and so on, and no changes at all. So maybe there should be a little bit more what it actually means to have a self-organizing team, and just to be a little bit more precise and clear about it. It's also a question to you who are much more familiar with Scrum than I am. So I'm a beginner.
Yeah, I guess I'm a little bit in the same direction as Klaus, that this is an area where I would probably like to have also a slightly more prescription of how to get started with going in that direction. But we're back to the discussion from before about less or more prescription. But yeah.
And I have another, and that's also a little bit of a question. I have heard several times that it's probably, I think the development team, they say, well, we need no planning because we can just start to experiment, and we can go back and well, it can be quite expensive. And even though we are in the complicated or in the complex domain, then we need to experiment a little bit, but there still should be some planning. And it seems to me that a lot of people around, they just say to Scrum Masters or people say, hey, we're not going to plan anything. I don't know if it's true, but some kind of planning is still needed.
I think that comes back to the problem with self-organizing,
Yeah.
as in selecting what I want to do as opposed to managing your time versus the goal. So that's not really Scrum's fault.
Okay.
That's a level of discipline that people are being told or negotiate together what they're going to do, and then they go and actually do that and don't get distracted and do something else they find more entertaining.
Yeah.
But that's
okay.
Within Scrum, obviously that's an issue, but it's not up to Scrum to prescribe how you have people be well behaved in their role, fulfilling whatever is in your sprint.
You have
I
Astrid?
think also, yeah, when we see it's actually when we're moving over to the red chaos post that you had before. So when we work with the unmature organization, we have to stick more to the book and be more restricted, actually. And I think when we see this, people don't want to plan, or they don't want to do Scrum, they want to do Kanban. They think they can avoid planning. It's actually because they don't want to commit, and are afraid of being transparent and afraid of being a group of or a team. So this is this avoiding working really closely together because it's new and it's painful now almost for some people. So there I go more by the book actually, and do more explaining of why is it a good thing and what can we get out of it.
Right. Yeah, so obviously, I mean, if you drop down on the left side here into chaos, and you just, well, this is what I think it is, and it's not just the teams. I mean, I've also come into situations where it's been management, for example, say, okay, so you say that, but I say here, Scrum is this, and then it's also a bastardized version of Scrum that doesn't really give what we want. Now, one of the things, and I'll jump back to the slide we were before, because for me, to get results out and get people to actually really engage and be part of this, more and more, I'm looking at the psychological safety part, where that also challenges the existing hierarchy. If the existing hierarchy in organization is a power game, and it's very hard not to get it to be that. It requires extremely mature leadership not to fall into, and we can just see it in the government crisis in Denmark at the moment. We're not all the way into American Trump territory, but we still have some power games going on here that that really is kind of scary to watch. And we have to provide for our team psychological safety. That means they have to be sure that nobody's going to be punished for admitting a mistake. Nobody's going to be punished for asking for help, and nobody's going to be punished for suggesting a better way of doing things. I would really encourage us to take that with us into the work with teams, so that they can that they dare to be different, and dare to change things. We are heading up towards the end of this, and thanks a lot for your comments. Yeah, Torsten.
But I saw, talking about hand gestures, I saw one from Vibeke, so maybe did you have a quick question or comment?
Thanks. No, it was just in the idea of how we are going to communicate in remote places. And I think Kurt understand the question as like when we are on Zoom, but if you look at it a bit wider and say you have like departments all over the world where you have to communicate with teams sitting in other countries. Well, I guess that's why we are looking into getting a tool to communicate on another level where you can communicate in a way so that everybody is on the beat on what is going on all over the place. So it was just a comment. There's more to it than being on Zoom having meetings.
Torsten, there's a few hands in the chat, or a few people who have raised their hands. Vladimir was one, I think.
Yes, thanks, Liza. If there is time for a reflection.
Sure.
Yeah. So for me, this slide really touches a nerve. For me, it took some maturity with Scrum, right, to become aware of certain things. Because we have the principle, let's say, take one from Agile Manifesto, build teams around motivated individuals. So if you already have a team of motivated individuals, do you really need Scrum? Or, for that, Scrum is just, the cherry on top of the cake. But it doesn't tell you or doesn't help you a lot how to actually motivate people. And to name another example, you hear issues or challenges of people, living and practicing Scrum. We don't get too much involvement of people in the retrospectives. And the typical advice you would hear, oh, change the format of your retrospective. But it's actually way more beyond that, right? It's about understanding what motivates people. Do they feel the psychological safety? And so all these aspects. And then I started asking around Scrum trainers, because I attend a lot of courses. Among one of those was the Scrum book, the patterns. So I asked the trainers, so who actually teaches you do this stuff? How to motivate people, how to actually assemble a team, or how do teams get formed? And pretty much everybody's silent. Nobody goes that far in dealing with these things. So I think this is really some great topics touched on here. Thanks.
Yeah. Torsten, Liza, should we just wrap up the last couple of slides and see if there are some final comments the last 5 minutes?
Let's do that.
All right then. So here we are, and so it's not easy. This is not easy at all, but the rewards are extremely high. If you've seen some of those teams that transform from a dull existing in the existing hierarchy, then you see them get into where they really can get into a pace, and they get to be the maximum of what they can be. That is really great to see. In our training and our material, we have a particular story we continue on, and that's about Mortensen's Hotel in Malmö. I saw someone from Malmö here, Jakob. So you probably know where Mortensen's Hotel is, and here's Mortensen, and he's in one of our stories that we use as an example. He's about to take over the hotel now. Here he is, ready to drive off in his old Volvo, and everybody tells him, how hard can it be? Just go over there and deal with it. Now, in reality, his journey is more like this one. Everybody tells us, make a plan, just go and do it. How hard can it be? But in actual life, Mortensen has no idea in his Volvo in the lower drawing to see that there's also a boat ride involved in getting to the hotel. We have complex environments, and we need to educate our people. We actually need to make more people leaders, because everybody has to make decisions when we're in uncharted territory. We have to push authority as far out as we can find people who carry it. And that's a hard job. Churchill said it's going to be hard, it's going to be long, but there will be no surrender. And let's take that attitude to it. And okay, apologize. The last slide here is probably a little bit of a commercial for what we're doing. Agile Lean Leadership. We try to expand Scrum's imprint, and as we build on Scrum, but we've added some of the other things that obviously are not in those 13 pages that the Scrum Guide represents. We've tried to come up with a solution for the whole organization by taking in the other concepts that we saw from other areas. Start with the customer, empower the product owner, the strategy owner, in whatever capacity we are in the organization, to give him the power to operate that unit that he's operating, build a value chain in the organization, just like we learned from Lean. We have the 3 pillars of this framework: Agile Lean leadership, the totality of everything. We drive by our network of people, where this concept is owned by the network. It's developed further by the network, and everybody who joins the network can be part of it. We run the education and training there. We have tools that we can deliver to the network, and we want to achieve radical improvement in organization through transparency and collaboration. And Scrum is the basis of that. The nucleus of that is the Scrum team. Organization that will build on character, competence, and clarity. Engaged and motivated people. We have to get there, and we have to do it. And then we have a tool, and we have a software tool that we developed, and we have it available for people and for people to participate in, that will help us give that transparency and collaboration to see how work happens through different views across the organization, building roadmaps, building story maps, outlines where we can see detailed plans and deadlines that we have to live with, the main backlog, the product backlog, the tactical backlog, the sprint backlog. We can execute teams. In a global world, we believe that we, first of all, have to have a global network supporting it, the whole concept, and we have to have a toolkit that allows us to do it. One of my, I don't know if I want to call Dave Snowden one of my favorites, because he always gives me a rough time when I'm ever together with him, because I've never completely understood his brilliance, and so he tells me off all the time. But nevertheless, he says at one point, sometimes if you want people to change behavior, you've got to give them the tools that allow them to change. And this is the journey we're on right now, and seeking collaborators all over the globe to jointly make a difference, and of course make a living while we're doing it. The new Scrum guide, I don't think that'll change an awful lot for me, really. I like it. I think I can easily give it to many of my clients to be inspired from, but I really mean that be inspired from, and not really to see what we need to do. So because again, it is less prescriptive. So that has to come from somewhere else. But the inspiration and the foundations and the values, etc., the principles, absolutely. I find it easier to use in the future. And I think with that, I'll probably rest my case here. You're welcome to contact, of course, either at our company or through LinkedIn or whatever. You will get the slides afterwards. If I don't know how you do that, Thorsten, but I'll make a PDF of this. And
I'll make sure we get a link to everyone, and the same goes for the recording. We will need to end the session now to end it on time. So, Liza, any final word from you?
No, except for thank you once again to Kurt. Thank you for taking your time. It has been great, and yeah.